A millionaire denies his own daughter for 9 years, until a $1 million bribe attempt exposed everything. Now, facing his daughter for the first time, he has to answer for 9 years of lies. But can a father who tried to erase his daughter ever truly be forgiven? This is where redemption begins, or ends. Before we dive in, comment where in the world you are watching from and don't forget to click subscribe. The mahogany doors of Morrison Financial Enterprises stood imposing against the Manhattan skyline as Victoria Chen stepped out of the elevator on the 42nd floor. 23 years she'd worked her way up from junior analyst to vice president of acquisitions, building her reputation on meticulous research and an almost preternatural ability to read people. Today, that skill would be tested in ways she couldn't have anticipated. The October afternoon light filtered through the pristine windows, casting geometric shadows across the polished marble floor. She'd made this walk thousands of times, but today her stomach twisted with an inexplicable dread. The sprawling office of Marcus Wellington occupied an entire corner of the building, all floor-to-ceiling windows and expensive minimalist furniture that screamed old money carefully invested. Paintings that cost more than most people's houses hung on the ivory walls. A Rothko that Victoria had heard cost $6 million dominated the space above a leather sofa so pristine it looked like it had never been sat upon. Marcus sat behind his glass desk, his tailored suit fitting perfectly over his lean frame, his smile charming but never quite reaching his steel-gray eyes. He'd called this meeting personally, which was unusual. Executives of his caliber didn't typically request meetings with department heads without going through proper channels. They had assistants. They had secretaries. They had entire departments designed to ensure they never had to personally initiate contact with anyone beneath a certain pay grade. "Victoria," he greeted her, standing to shake her hand. His grip was firm, controlled, the grip of a man accustomed to establishing dominance in every interaction. She noticed the slight pressure, the held beat longer than necessary. His watch was a Patek Philippe, platinum case, probably worth $200,000. Everything about him whispered money and power in carefully calibrated doses. "I have a proposition for you. One that requires absolute discretion." She settled into the leather chair across from him, maintaining her professional composure, even as her instincts hummed with caution. Her coffee had cost $5 from the cafe downstairs. His desk probably cost more than her annual rent. The inequality of the room was not lost on her. "I'm listening," she said, her voice level and professional. Marcus moved to the window, his silhouette framed against the glittering city below, where 9 million people went about their lives, unaware of the conversations happening in rooms like this. "I'm going through a personal matter, something that requires documentation, a certain kind of documentation that needs to remain private." He turned back to face her, his expression carefully neutral. "I need you to help me obtain medical records, specifically DNA test results." Victoria's internal alarm bells began ringing, a sound like warning sirens in her chest. Her role in acquisitions had nothing to do with obtaining medical records, and the way he was framing this felt deliberately ambiguous. It was the kind of request that seemed innocent on the surface, but became increasingly troubling the more you thought about it. "What kind of medical records?" she asked, choosing her words with care. "And from whom?" The hesitation that crossed Marcus's face lasted only a fraction of a second, but Victoria caught it. In her years of reading acquisitions targets and their representatives, she'd learned to see these tells. The slight tightening around the eyes, the barely perceptible tensing of the jaw, the way his hand moved to adjust his perfectly placed cufflinks. "A woman I was involved with years ago, before I was married. She's making certain claims about our past. I need concrete proof that these claims are baseless." The specificity was interesting. He wasn't asking her to find information about a child in general terms. He was asking her to find information that would disprove a claim, which meant someone, somewhere, had made a claim he wanted to invalidate, which meant he was either terrified it was true or desperate for people to believe it was false. "I'm not sure that falls within my purview," Victoria said carefully. "That sounds like something you'd need a lawyer for." "This seems more like family law territory." "Not a lawyer," Marcus said, and something in his tone had shifted. It had become smoother, more insistent. the tone of someone unaccustomed to being told no. Someone who knows how to navigate systems quietly. Someone who understands discretion. His eyes held hers with an intensity that suggested they were discussing something far more consequential than medical records. Someone like you, Victoria stood collecting her phone and notepad, her movements deliberate and measured. I'm going to have to decline, Mr. Wellington. If you need legal counsel, I can recommend some excellent firms. Harrison and Matthews specializes in family law. They're very discreet, very effective. As she moved toward the door, her hand reaching for the handle, Marcus's voice stopped her. $500,000. The number hung in the air between them like a physical thing, heavy with implication. Victoria turned back, keeping her expression neutral even as her mind did the mathematics. $500,000 was money that changed lives. $500,000 was enough to move out of the cramped apartment she shared with another woman in Astoria. $500,000 was enough to buy a small house somewhere upstate, to start a consulting firm of her own, to stop answering to men like Marcus Wellington entirely. But it was also money that came with strings attached. Victoria had seen enough corporate corruption in her 23 years to know that you never got this kind of money for something simple. That's not going to change my answer, she said, her voice steady. He smiled, and it was a smile that didn't contain a trace of warmth. It was the smile of a man who was accustomed to getting whatever he wanted, and who was mildly amused by the suggestion that this might not happen. Make it $1 million. The office suddenly felt smaller, the air thicker, harder to breathe. $1 million was life-changing money, even for someone in Victoria's position. It was enough to move out of the city entirely if she wanted to. Enough to stop working for men like Marcus Wellington. Enough to build something of her own. Something real and meaningful, and not tied to the whims of billionaires. But it was also enough to ruin everything if it went wrong. If she took this money and did what he was asking, she would be complicit in something. She didn't yet know exactly what, but her instincts were screaming that she would be making a moral compromise that would reverberate through the rest of her life. What exactly are you asking me to do? She heard herself say, the question escaping before she could stop it. Get me DNA test results from a woman named Alicia Thornton. She lives in Brooklyn. She's apparently been making claims that I fathered her daughter 9 years ago. I need those results to prove the child isn't mine. The specificity of the request suddenly became clear. This wasn't about abstract documentation or theoretical scenarios. This was about a real woman, a real child, and a man trying to prove that the child wasn't his. Victoria understood the implication immediately. He didn't just want the results. He wanted something he could use to discredit her, something he could weaponize in court or in the court of public opinion. He wanted Victoria to help him erase a human being from his narrative. Find them, he continued, returning to his desk as if the matter was already settled. Whatever it takes, make them say what needs to be said. Victoria's mouth went dry. The sunlight from the window suddenly felt harsh against her skin. You're asking me to falsify medical records. No, Marcus said, his smile returning, that same cold smile that contained no warmth whatsoever. I'm asking you to find existing records. What those records say is not my concern. The distinction he was drawing was meaningless, and they both knew it. But it was a distinction that allowed him to maintain plausible deniability, to craft a narrative in which he was simply asking for information, while what he was actually doing was asking her to become an accomplice to deception. If she found the real records, he would take them as proof the child wasn't his, regardless of what they actually said. If he later wanted to claim they were forged, he could do so knowing that the falsification couldn't be traced back to him directly. She would be the one holding the bag if anything went wrong. I can't do this, Victoria said, moving toward the door again, her hand reaching for the handle. Then I'm afraid I'll need to let you go. The words were delivered conversationally, as if he'd suggested they grab lunch together or commented on the weather. But the threat embedded in them was immediate and unmistakable. My board of directors should hear by end of business that I've terminated your position due to systematic incompetence in your last 3 acquisitions, all of which you'll recall were actually quite profitable. Her hand froze on the door handle. She could feel her heart rate accelerating, the adrenaline beginning to spike through her system. You'd lie about my performance? I'd prefer to think of it as a different perspective, he said, leaning back in his leather chair, as if he had all the time in the world and nowhere else to be. He was completely at ease, a man unaccustomed to consequences. Your acquisitions were aggressive, potentially problematic. Someone like me might see legal liability where you see profit. These things are subjective, really. It's all a matter of interpretation. The threat was implicit but unmistakable. Either she helped him, or he'd destroy her career. Either way, he got what he wanted. She could fight the termination, she supposed. She could try to prove it was retaliation. But his lawyers would be better than her lawyers. His resources would be greater than her resources. He was a man accustomed to having his way, and men like that had learned to cover their tracks. She walked out of his office without responding, her mind spinning through possibilities as her feet carried her toward the elevator. The elevator doors slid open with a soft hiss, and she stepped inside, watching the number pad glow as she descended from the 42nd floor back down to ground level. By the time the doors opened on the lobby, she'd already made her decision, but it wasn't the decision he'd expected. The turning point. The call came through to the Brooklyn Police Department 3 hours later. Victoria Chen had requested a meeting with Detective Raymond Morris, a 40-year veteran of the force who'd learned to trust his instincts about when something didn't add up. They sat in a small coffee shop near his precinct, the kind of place where the coffee was always too hot and the pie was always mediocre, but where they made you feel welcome. Morris ordered black coffee. Victoria ordered tea with honey. Neither of them ordered pie. Morris listened without interrupting as Victoria laid out everything Marcus had asked her to do. She described the meeting in his office, the way he'd framed the request, the escalating amount of money he'd offered, the implicit threat to her career if she refused. She described the specificity of the request, the woman's name, the child's age, the claim of paternity. She described how he'd asked her to falsify medical records while simultaneously claiming he was asking for nothing of the sort. Morris listened without interrupting, his weathered face revealing nothing. When she finished, he was quiet for a long moment, his hands wrapped around his coffee cup as if drawing warmth from it. When he finally spoke, his voice was gentle but firm. This woman, Alicia Thornton, you know anything about her? Only what he told me, Victoria replied. That she's apparently claiming he's the father of her daughter. That she's demanding acknowledgement or support, something like that. Morris made notes in the small pad he always carried, the one he'd been carrying for so long it was starting to fall apart at the spine. Here's the thing about guys like Wellington. They usually don't ask for something this specific, unless they're terrified it might be true. The falsification request, that's just insurance. If the real results prove he's the father, he'll claim the originals were forged. If they prove he's not the father, he'll use them to humiliate the woman. Either way, he's protected. Victoria hadn't thought about it that way, but Morris was right. The request wasn't about finding truth. It was about controlling the narrative, about making sure that whatever truth existed would be filtered through a lens of his own creation. I've been thinking about leaving New York, Victoria said quietly, watching the steam rise from her tea. About starting over somewhere else. This job, it's been my life for so long. I forgot what I was willing to do to keep it. I forgot what I was willing to become. Morris closed his notepad and looked at her directly, his pale blue eyes carrying the weight of 25 years spent investigating crimes, understanding human nature, learning how to separate truth from lies. Do you want to help us with Alicia Thornton? Because I think she needs someone in her corner, someone who understands how people like Wellington operate. Victoria thought about the woman she'd never met, a woman who'd apparently been alone with her claim long enough that Marcus Wellington felt confident enough to try to suppress it through threats and money. The woman who'd apparently raised a 9-year-old daughter, while the child's father built a financial empire and cultivated a reputation as a man of integrity and honor. The woman whose existence had apparently become such an inconvenience to him that he was willing to ask someone like Victoria to help him erase her from his history. I'll help, Victoria said. Tell me what you need. Across the borough. Meanwhile, across the borough in a modest apartment building in Park Slope, Alicia Thornton stood in her kitchen watching her daughter Zara eat breakfast before school. The 9-year-old had her father's sharp features, something Alicia had noticed from birth. The same angular jawline, the same intelligence in her eyes that assessed situations with unusual maturity for her age. The same way of watching the world, as if trying to understand its mechanisms and secrets. It broke Alicia's heart every time she looked at her daughter. "You're going to be late," Alicia said gently, even though they had 20 minutes before the school bus came. Zara was already dressed in her blue school uniform, her backpack packed and waiting by the door. She did this every morning, this careful preparation, this precision in her routine. Alicia recognized it as a coping mechanism. Children developed them when their lives felt unpredictable, when they needed to create order in the chaos of circumstances beyond their control. "What's your field trip today?" Alicia asked, sitting across from her daughter with her own cup of coffee, the black coffee that was her constant companion in these early morning hours before the world woke up and demanded things from her. "Science museum," Zara replied, not looking up from her toast, which she was eating with methodical precision, taking small bites and chewing each one completely before taking the next one. "We're supposed to learn about DNA, about how you inherit traits from your parents." She finally looked at her mother, something unspoken in her gaze, something that suggested she was asking a question that went far deeper than the words she spoke. "Why don't you ever talk about my dad?" The question came up periodically, always in the same careful way, as if Zara was testing whether this time would be different, as if she was hoping that one day the answer would change, that her mother would suddenly reveal that Zara's father actually wanted to know her, that he'd been waiting all this time for the opportunity to meet her, that he loved her. "Your father is a complicated person, sweetheart," Alicia said. That was the answer she always gave, and it was true, though incomplete. The fuller truth was that Zara's father had denied her existence the moment Alicia told him she was pregnant, that he'd given her money for an abortion and walked away, that he'd built a whole different life, a better life apparently, one that didn't include the daughter he'd conceived 9 years ago, in what had apparently been just a brief interlude in his otherwise carefully controlled existence. "You look like him," Alicia added, and this part was also true. "He has the same face you do. Smart face. Do you think he'd want to know me?" The question broke Alicia's heart in a way nothing else could, because she saw the hope in her daughter's eyes, the longing for something she'd been denied through no fault of her own. A child shouldn't have to hope for her own father's acknowledgement. It wasn't right. It wasn't fair. And yet here they were, year after year, this question hanging between them. "I don't know," Alicia said quietly, her voice small in the morning kitchen. "I've tried to tell him about you, but he doesn't want to listen." Zara processed this information with the gravity of someone much older than 9 years old. "So, he just doesn't want to be my father?" "That's the thing about being a parent," Alicia said, reaching across the table to take her daughter's hand. "It's not something you can undo. Once you help create a person, they exist in the world. You exist in the world. Whether he acknowledges it or not doesn't change that. But it would be nice if he did," Zara said quietly. And Alicia couldn't argue with that. It absolutely would be nice. The bus arrived, as it did every weekday morning, and Alicia walked her daughter downstairs, waiting until Zara was safely aboard before heading back up to her apartment on the 3rd floor. She called into her job at the community center, where she worked part-time as a counselor, helping people navigate the complications of their lives, trying to provide tools and support and wisdom that she sometimes felt she didn't fully possess herself. Then she settled at her small kitchen table with a cup of tea and the letter she'd been holding on to for 3 days. It was from a lawyer representing Marcus Wellington. The letter informed her, in careful legal language, that any claim she made regarding the paternity of her daughter would be defended with extreme prejudice, that any attempts to obtain financial support or access would result in countersuits for defamation and harassment, that she should cease all attempts at contact immediately or face legal consequences that would be severe and unpleasant. The letter was designed to intimidate, and it had worked. Alicia had spent the past 3 days oscillating between anger and fear. She'd always known Marcus would deny his daughter. She'd never expected him to pursue her so aggressively, with the resources of his legal team and the weight of his money behind him. Then came the second event, the moment that changed everything. Victoria's choice. Alicia had been walking home from the subway when a woman approached her on the street. The woman was professional-looking, with warm brown eyes and an air of someone accustomed to being listened to. She was dressed impeccably, in a way that suggested she knew how to navigate professional spaces. Her name was Victoria Chen, and she worked, she claimed, for a consulting firm that specialized in family reconciliation. The name was obviously fake. The business card was obviously fake. But Victoria herself seemed genuine in a way Alicia couldn't quite explain. There was something in the directness of her gaze that suggested she wasn't lying about the important things. "We met because Marcus Wellington tried to hire me to falsify DNA tests that would prove your daughter isn't his," Victoria said without preamble, without small talk or explanation. Just the truth, laid bare on the street corner while pedestrians rushed past them. Alicia felt the ground tilt slightly beneath her feet. The news was shocking, not because she was surprised Marcus would do this, but because she was shocked that someone had refused to help him do it. That there was apparently someone in the world who had principles after all. "He what?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. Victoria quickly explained the meeting in Marcus's office, the $1 million offer, the implicit threat to her career if she refused. She also explained that she'd gone to the police instead, that Detective Morris had asked her to approach Alicia, that there might be an opportunity to pursue this matter with actual legal backing. Police backing. Legal backing. Things Alicia had never imagined might actually be available to her. "I don't have money for lawyers," Alicia said immediately, fear and hope warring in her chest. "And I don't have the emotional energy for a custody battle. I just want him to acknowledge her. That's all I've ever wanted." Victoria studied her for a long moment. "Has he ever taken a DNA test?" "No," Alicia admitted. "He won't. He's already decided the answer." "That's his choice to make," Victoria said. "But here's what he might not have considered. There are ways to obtain DNA without his cooperation, ways that are completely legal if done properly, ways that would hold up in court and couldn't be disputed." Alicia's heart began to beat faster. The possibility that had seemed so impossibly distant suddenly felt tangible. "You're talking about going to court?" "In a manner of speaking," Victoria confirmed. "But first, we need to build a case. We need documentation of his refusal to acknowledge his daughter. We need medical records showing that you were pregnant and gave birth at the time he would have had to be the father. We need witnesses who can testify to your relationship with him. Most importantly, we need to understand why he's so desperate to keep this secret that he's willing to commit crimes to protect it." Building the evidence. Over the next several weeks, Victoria and Alicia worked together with Detective Morris to build what appeared to be a straightforward paternity case. But as they dug deeper into the details, they began to uncover something more complicated, something darker, something that suggested this wasn't just about one man denying one child. Marcus Wellington wasn't just denying his daughter out of ego or convenience. He was denying her as part of a larger pattern that stretched back over more than a decade. There had been another woman 6 years before Alicia, another woman who'd become pregnant and subsequently disappeared from the social media ecosystem entirely. There had been another woman after Alicia, another pregnancy, another disappearance, then another. The pattern suggested something deliberate, something orchestrated, something that went far beyond simple denial. Victoria found herself spending more time on the case than she'd ever intended to spend on anything outside her professional work. She began taking unpaid leave from Morrison Financial Enterprises. She interviewed the other women, each of whom had been paid off, threatened, or both. She documented the consistent nature of Marcus's denials and the increasingly hostile methods he employed to enforce them. She discovered that he'd fathered at least 5 children that anyone could prove, and possibly more. Each denial had been absolute. Each child had been written out of his narrative, as if they'd never existed at all. Alicia, meanwhile, was preparing Zara for the possibility that her father might have to be confronted in court. She tried to buffer her daughter from the details, while also being honest about what might happen. Honesty seemed important. Children could sense when adults were lying, and they'd feel more betrayed when the truth eventually emerged. "You know that DNA test you learned about at the museum?" Alicia said one evening as they sat on the couch together, the television playing quietly in the background. "Well, there's a possibility we might ask your dad to take one, to prove that you're his daughter." Zara's entire body went rigid, the hand holding the remote suddenly still. The possibility of actually having her paternity established seemed to terrify her as much as it thrilled her. "Would he do it?" she asked, her voice small and uncertain. "Honestly, I don't know. But if we asked, if we went to court and asked, he wouldn't have a choice. It would be something he had to do." Zara absorbed this for a long moment, the weight of possibility settling over her 9-year-old shoulders. What if he says no again? Then we know that he's choosing to say no, even when he could take a test to prove it one way or the other. That would tell us something important about his character. It would tell us that his denial isn't about doubt, it's about choice. "But what if I want him to say yes?" Zara asked, and her voice contained a longing so profound that Alicia had to blink back tears. This child had been waiting 9 years to be claimed by her father. Alicia knew the weight of that waiting. She lived with it every day. Then we have to try. We have to do everything we can to give him the opportunity to choose yes. The legal machinery. 9 years after the night that created her, Zara Thornton's existence was about to collide with the man who'd denied her from the moment he learned she existed. The collision would come in a courtroom in Manhattan, in front of a judge and a DNA test that would make lies impossible to maintain. But before it came to that, there would be depositions and negotiations, legal threats and desperate letters. One more attempt by Marcus Wellington to control the narrative before it spiraled beyond his ability to contain it. One more try to erase the inconvenient truth that he'd fathered a child he didn't want to acknowledge. The first official document was served on a Tuesday morning. Marcus's lawyer received notification that Alicia Thornton was pursuing a paternity case and requesting a court-ordered DNA test. The notification was formal and official, the kind of thing that makes powerful men sit up straighter and pay attention. The response came within 48 hours, fast enough to suggest that Marcus had been waiting for this, had been preparing his defense for months. Marcus Wellington's legal team filed a motion to dismiss based on insufficient evidence of paternity claim. They argued that Alicia Thornton was a gold digger who'd had inappropriate contact with their client years ago and was now attempting to extract money by claiming a child was his. They presented a character witness statement, carefully worded to suggest that Marcus was a man of integrity who would never deny his own child if he believed one existed. The statement was signed by his wife, Catherine, and the act of it being there, in the legal record, would later seem cruel in its naivety. Catherine Wellington had no idea who Alicia Thornton was. She had no idea that her husband had fathered children before their marriage, children he'd denied and abandoned and paid off to disappear from his life. She believed his denials completely, and her belief was exactly the kind of shield Marcus needed to continue operating. The shield of a devoted wife who'd believed her husband's lies so thoroughly that she'd put her name on legal documents affirming his character. Victoria read the legal response and felt a coldness settle into her chest. This was going to be harder than she'd anticipated. Marcus wasn't just going to deny the paternity. He was going to go on offense, attacking Alicia's character while simultaneously claiming he was the victim of an extortion attempt. The strategy was crude but effective, especially with a judge who might be inclined to dismiss the case as the desperate act of a jilted lover trying to squeeze money out of a wealthy man. "We need to move up our timeline," Victoria told Detective Morris as they reviewed the documents together in the small conference room at the police station. "We need to get the DNA test ordered before they can convince the court that this is frivolous." Morris had connections with the family court system, relationships built over 25 years of working within the system. He knew judges who would listen to evidence that went beyond the surface, who would dig deeper when something didn't add up. He arranged for the case to be assigned to Judge Patricia Hernandez, a woman known for her willingness to look past the first narrative presented to her, to search for truth beneath the legal maneuvering. Judge Hernandez reviewed the file and requested an emergency hearing within 2 weeks. The courtroom. When that hearing arrived, Alicia sat in the courtroom with her daughter in the gallery behind her. Zara had insisted on being there, despite Alicia's attempts to protect her from the scene. The child deserved to witness her own existence being validated. Zara had argued with a clarity and maturity that broke her mother's heart. Even if it happened in a courtroom, even if it was hard and uncomfortable and wrong in all sorts of ways. Zara deserved to see the moment when the legal system acknowledged her existence. Marcus arrived with his lawyer and his wife. Catherine Wellington looked confused and vaguely hurt, as if she'd only just begun to understand that something significant had been hidden from her. Marcus himself looked controlled, his face carefully blank, a man accustomed to having his way in business and still convinced it would be the same in this forum. The hearing began with Alicia's lawyer presenting the evidence, medical records confirming the pregnancy and birth, testimony from Victoria about the attempt to falsify DNA tests, about the $1 million offer and the implicit threats, documentation of Marcus's consistent denial and evasion, the pattern of similar denials with other women, the history of abandonment that stretched back over more than a decade. By the time the presentation finished, even Judge Hernandez's professional composure showed signs of strain. Her eyes had narrowed, her lips had pressed together. The judge, who'd seen many cases but perhaps not this particular combination of denial and deception, seemed to be processing something disturbing. She ordered the DNA test to take place within 3 weeks. She also ordered Marcus to pay temporary child support to Alicia Thornton, effective immediately, pending the results of the test. The amount was substantial. Not the kind of money that would bankrupt a millionaire, but the kind of money that made it clear the judge was taking the case seriously. As they left the courthouse, Marcus caught Victoria's eye across the room. His expression was pure hatred. She'd crossed a line that he hadn't believed could be crossed. She'd taken his narrative and shattered it in public. She'd done it in front of his wife and in front of the entire legal system. He would not forget this. The waiting game. The DNA test results took 3 weeks and 2 days to come back. In that time, Marcus retained a new lawyer, a specialist in family law with a reputation for aggressive tactics and for finding legal loopholes that no one else could discover. He filed 4 separate motions challenging the validity of the DNA testing procedure, the chain of custody for the samples, and the scientific reliability of the methodology used. He hired a private investigator to build a dossier on Alicia, looking for anything that could be used to discredit her, any detail that could be weaponized in court. He did not, notably, take any steps to actually prepare for the possibility that the test results would be positive. When the results arrived, they were unambiguous, unmistakable, impossible to dispute. The probability of paternity was 99.97%. There was no meaningful room for doubt. There was nowhere to hide, no legal maneuvering that could change the objective reality of biology. Marcus Wellington was the father of Zara Thornton, and now everyone knew it. The reckoning. The courtroom where the results were presented was packed with journalists, curious observers, and the various interested parties in the case. Word had leaked that a major paternity case had been established, that a Manhattan millionaire had been definitively proven to be the father of a child he'd denied for 9 years. The media scent was up, and they'd come circling. Judge Hernandez reviewed the DNA results with visible satisfaction. The science was clear. The paternity was established. What remained was the question of what to do now, how to proceed with the legal and moral implications of a man who denied his daughter so thoroughly that he'd tried to suppress the very possibility of her existence. Marcus's lawyer launched into a prepared speech about the difference between biological paternity and legal paternity, about the importance of protecting the established family unit, about the undue burden on Mr. Wellington to suddenly adjust his life to accommodate a child he'd never known he had. Judge Hernandez listened to the entire presentation without expression. Her hands were folded on the desk in front of her. When the lawyer finished, she looked directly at Marcus. Mr. Wellington, you have been adjudicated the biological father of Zara Thornton through DNA evidence. You will now be declared the legal father for all intents and purposes. You will contribute to her support, her education, and her welfare. You will have the option to request custody or visitation if you choose to do so. You will do this because she is your daughter, and her existence is not a problem to be solved. Her existence is not something you can deny or erase, or make disappear through legal maneuvering. She exists. She has always existed. The law now reflects that reality. The judge turned to Alicia. Ms. Thornton, you are granted full custody with the right to establish child support payments as specified in the court order. You may also request that the child's legal name be changed to reflect the father's surname if you choose to do so. Alicia's eyes filled with tears. though whether they were from relief or something more complicated, she couldn't say. Behind her in the gallery, Zara sat very still, processing the moment when her existence was finally, officially, legally recognized by the man who'd denied her for 9 years. Not as a matter of opinion or preference or legal interpretation, but as an objective, biological, undeniable fact. It was what she'd wanted. It was not the reconciliation she'd hoped for. The difference between these two things would shape the next chapter of her life in ways no one in that courtroom could predict. The courthouse steps seemed to stretch forever as Alicia and Zara descended into the October sunlight, photographers and journalists calling out questions that dissolved into noise. Zara's hand was small and tight in Alicia's grasp, the child's eyes fixed forward, processing something that would take years to fully integrate into her understanding of herself and the world. The legal judgment had been rendered. The DNA had been unambiguous. Marcus Wellington was her father, but legal status and emotional reality were two entirely different things, and Zara was learning that lesson in real time. Victoria Chen walked beside them, her presence a quiet reassurance. She'd become more than just Alicia's advocate over the past weeks. She'd become something like a friend, though neither woman had quite articulated that yet. The kind of connection that forms between people who've weathered something difficult together and emerged on the other side with respect and genuine care for one another. "You were incredible in there," Victoria said to Zara once they'd cleared the throng of reporters. "The way you sat so still, the way you listened. That took courage." Zara looked up at her with those intelligent eyes that seemed too old for a 9-year-old. "I wanted him to see me," she said simply. "I wanted him to know I was real." The words hung in the air between the three of them. Of course, that's what Zara had wanted. She'd been denied existence for 9 years. Being seen was perhaps the most fundamental human need, and her father had tried to make her invisible. Detective Morris found them at a small cafe a few blocks from the courthouse. He carried himself with the satisfaction of a man who'd seen justice served, though his weathered face suggested he knew this was just one case among many countless others where justice remained elusive. He ordered coffee, declined pie, and sat across from Alicia. "The press is going to be relentless," he said without preamble. "You should prepare for that. Journalists want a narrative. They want conflict and drama and human interest angles. They want your story." "I don't want to be a story," Alicia said quietly. "I just want to be a mother raising her daughter. I want normal." "Normal left the building the moment you went to court," Morris said, not unkindly. "But that doesn't mean you have to cooperate with every reporter who calls. You get to decide how much of your life you're willing to share." Victoria pulled out a business card from her new consulting firm. "I can help with that. With media management. With making sure your narrative stays yours instead of becoming whatever the press decides to make it." Over the next few days, Alicia received letters from 3 different television networks offering substantial money for her story. Producers wanted to make documentaries. Magazine writers wanted exclusive interviews. The story of the millionaire who'd denied his child, the single mother who'd fought for justice, the DNA test that proved the truth. It was compelling television. It was the kind of story that sold papers and drew viewers. Alicia turned them all down. She had the child support coming in. That was enough. What she needed now was privacy and time and space for Zara to adjust to this new reality. But Marcus Wellington, it turned out, had no interest in allowing them either of those things. The letter arrived 3 weeks after the verdict. It was from his lawyer, of course. Marcus himself would never have the courage to write something like this directly. The letter outlined his intention to pursue visitation rights, to begin a relationship with his daughter, to be, as the lawyers put it, a significant and meaningful presence in the child's life. Alicia's first instinct was anger. Her second was fear. The man had spent 9 years denying Zara's existence. What could possibly motivate him now to suddenly want to be her father? The answer came quickly enough when she read the next paragraph. His wife Catherine had left him. She'd discovered the pattern of denials, the other children, the years of lying. She'd learned what her own testimony in court had really meant, that she'd been used by him, that her character endorsement had been a weapon in his arsenal. She'd moved out of their apartment and filed for divorce. More significantly, she'd spoken to journalists about what she'd learned, and her story was spreading through the media ecosystem rapidly. Marcus, it seemed, wanted to rehabilitate his image. He wanted to position himself as a reformed man, a father who'd been given a second chance and was determined to do right by his daughter. He wanted the narrative of redemption. He wanted America to forgive him because he was willing to finally acknowledge the child he'd denied for 9 years. He's doing this for him, Victoria said when Alicia showed her the letter. They sat in Victoria's new office, which was small but elegant, decorated with the kind of minimalist aesthetic that suggested someone with confidence in her own taste. He's not doing this for Zara. He's doing this to repair his reputation. Should I let him see her? Alicia asked. Is that what's best for Zara? Victoria was quiet for a long moment. That's above my pay grade. That's something you need to decide with someone who specializes in child psychology. But I'll tell you what I know about men like Marcus. They don't usually change fundamentally. What changes is their circumstances. When denying his daughter worked for him, he denied her. Now that acknowledging her works for him, he's willing to do that. What will happen when she becomes inconvenient again? The question terrified Alicia because she knew Victoria was probably right. But she also knew that Zara was asking questions now. Zara wanted to understand her father. Zara wanted to know if he could change. Zara, at 9 years old, was grappling with the question of whether people were capable of redemption, whether someone who'd denied you could learn to accept you. Alicia consulted with a child psychologist, Dr. Sarah Mills, a woman in her 60s, with gray hair, and eyes that had clearly witnessed human complexity in all its iterations. They sat in her comfortable office, surrounded by books and plants, and the kind of warmth that came from decades of holding space for people's pain. The research suggests that children benefit from relationships with both parents when those parents are safe, and the child's safety is prioritized, Dr. Mills said carefully. But this situation is complex. The father has shown himself to be capable of significant selfishness. The question is whether he's capable of genuine change, or whether he's simply adjusting his behavior to serve his own interests. How do I know which one it is? Alicia asked. You don't, Dr. Mills said. Not immediately. But you can structure the situation to protect Zara, supervise visits initially, clear boundaries around what is and isn't acceptable, professional monitoring to ensure the child's emotional safety. And you can be very clear with Zara about what's happening. You can tell her that her father is learning to be a father, that this is an experiment, that if he fails to show up or fails to be respectful of her, the visits will stop. Alicia brought the proposal to Marcus's lawyer. Supervised visits, no overnight stays, professional monitoring, clear behavioral expectations. If Marcus wanted to establish a relationship with his daughter, he would do it on terms that prioritized her safety and well-being. To everyone's surprise, Marcus agreed immediately. The lawyer sent a response within hours. He accepted all terms. He was willing to participate in whatever framework would allow him to build a relationship with his daughter. He was, the letter stated, committed to demonstrating genuine change and earning the trust of his family. The first supervised visit took place in a comfortable room at the Family Services Center, designed specifically for these kinds of encounters. The walls were painted a soft blue. There were toys and games and art supplies, everything designed to make the interaction feel less official, less threatening. An elderly woman named Mrs. Patterson sat in the corner, clipboard in hand, her job to observe and document that nothing inappropriate occurred. Zara was terrified. Alicia could see it in the way her daughter's hands trembled as they waited for Marcus to arrive. The girl had rehearsed this in her mind 1,000 times. She'd imagined conversations. She'd prepared questions. Now that the moment was here, all of that preparation seemed to evaporate into pure fear. When Marcus walked through the door, Alicia was struck by how old he looked. Not just aged in the physical sense, though 9 years had taken their toll. He looked defeated in some fundamental way. A man whose armor had been stripped away, leaving the vulnerable person underneath. "Hello, Zara," he said, and his voice was quiet and uncertain. He sat down across from her, leaving careful space between them. "I'm Marcus. I'm your father." The word seemed inadequate and also momentous. He was stating a biological fact as if it were a revelation, as if his acknowledgement of it gave it new meaning. Zara didn't speak. She stared at him, studying his face, noting the features she recognized from photographs and from mirrors. The angular jawline, the intelligence in the eyes, the slight curve to the mouth. "You look like me," Marcus said, and it seemed like the only thing he could think to say. "I know," Zara replied, her voice steady despite her fear. "Mom said so." They sat in awkward silence for several moments. Mrs. Patterson made notes on her clipboard. The clock on the wall ticked audibly. "I'm sorry I didn't know about you," Marcus said finally. "Your mother told me, and I made a choice. A bad choice. I was afraid, and young, and selfish. I told myself stories about why I didn't have to be your father. I told myself stories until I almost believed them." Zara's expression didn't change, but her hands stopped trembling. "What stories?" she asked. Marcus took a deep breath. "That you weren't real. That acknowledging you would ruin my life. That your mother was lying. That I could just ignore you and you would go away." He looked directly at her. "All of those stories were wrong. I was wrong." "Does that mean you want to be my father now?" Zara asked, and the simplicity of the question seemed to cut right through all the adult complexity. "I don't know if I know how to be a good father," Marcus said, and there was something honest in his admission. "But I want to try. If you're willing to let me try." The first visit lasted an hour. They played a board game. They talked about school. Marcus asked questions and actually listened to the answers. He didn't try to be the hero or the rescuer. He didn't try to make up for 9 years of absence in 60 minutes. He simply sat with his daughter and allowed himself to be examined and judged, and ultimately, tentatively, accepted. When Zara left with Alicia, she didn't say much. But that night, as Alicia tucked her into bed, Zara asked a new question. "Is he nice?" she asked. "I don't know him very well," Alicia admitted. "But I think he's trying to be." That might be enough. The visits became a weekly ritual. Every Saturday at 2 o'clock, Marcus would arrive at the Family Services Center and spend an hour with his daughter. Over the weeks and months, the visits evolved. They moved from board games to talking about books. Marcus learned that Zara loved science and wanted to be an astronomer. He bought her a telescope and set it up on the roof of his apartment building. He attended her school play even though it was awkward, and he didn't know where to sit. Catherine's divorce from Marcus was finalized 6 months after the courtroom verdict. She received a substantial settlement and moved to Los Angeles to start a new life. Before she left, she reached out to Alicia and Victoria for coffee. The 3 women sat in a quiet cafe, a strange arrangement of people connected by the same man in very different ways. "I should have known," Catherine said, not unkindly. "I should have looked closer. I should have noticed the patterns." "You were his wife," Victoria said gently. "It's not your job to investigate him. It's not your fault that he lied to you." The Catherine nodded, but Alicia could see she was carrying guilt anyway, the kind of guilt that lingered even when you knew logically that you weren't responsible. "I wanted to say thank you," Catherine added, looking at Alicia, "for not making this easy for him. For fighting for your daughter. I raised a child that wasn't mine for 8 years before I found out the truth. I loved that child, and I was angry at Marcus for denying the others, for denying Zara. What you did, it mattered." After Catherine left, Victoria turned to Alicia. "You should know that I've decided to focus my consulting firm on cases like this, on helping people navigate situations where they need to uncover truth. Marcus tried to hire me to suppress truth. I want to build a business on revealing it." Alicia smiled. "That sounds like the right use of a very particular skill set." A year after the courtroom verdict, Zara stood in her school gymnasium for career day. Parents came to talk about their jobs. Alicia spoke about working in community mental health, and Zara had asked if her father could come too, if he could talk about his job in finance. Marcus sat on the gymnasium bleachers, clearly uncomfortable in the space but determined to be present. When it was his turn to speak, he told the assembled 3rd and 4th graders about financial management and investment strategy. But before he left, he said something else. "My daughter Zara is in this room," he said, pointing to where Zara sat beaming in the audience. "I wasn't always a good father to her. For a long time, I pretended she didn't exist. I wasn't ready to be what she needed me to be. But she was patient with me, and my family was patient with me. And I learned that being a parent isn't about being perfect. It's about showing up. It's about admitting when you're wrong and trying to do better. That's the most important thing I've learned from my daughter. After the presentation, other parents approached him, some offering forgiveness for things he'd done in the business world, others simply being human in the way people are when they witness genuine remorse and effort to change. Zara watched her father navigate these conversations, and Alicia could see something shift in her daughter's face. Not complete healing, not instant reconciliation, but perhaps the beginning of being able to see her father as a person, rather than as a symbol of rejection. 2 years after the courtroom verdict, Marcus suggested something that startled everyone. He wanted Zara to spend 2 weeks with him in the summer. A real vacation. Time that involved overnight stays and waking up in his apartment, and his helping her with homework and teaching her things. Alicia was terrified. She consulted with Dr. Mills again. They discussed safeguards and check-in procedures and exit strategies if things went wrong. But Zara was 11 now, and she wanted to go. "I want to know him," she told her mother, "not just in 1-hour visits. I want to see what it's like to actually have a father." The 2 weeks were neither perfect nor disastrous. There were moments of genuine connection. Marcus took Zara to the planetarium, to science museums, to restaurants she liked. He showed her his office, explaining what he did in terms she could understand. But there were also moments of awkwardness and difficulty. Times when Zara demanded more from him than he was prepared to give. Times when Marcus's old patterns of selfishness threatened to resurface before he caught himself and adjusted. On the last day, sitting on the roof of his building with the telescope set up before them, Marcus had a conversation with Zara that changed something between them. "I know I'm not a very good father yet," he said carefully. "I'm still learning." "You're better than you were," Zara said, looking through the telescope at Saturn's rings. "But you're still kind of selfish sometimes. You still think about your own feelings before you think about mine." "I do," Marcus admitted. "Is that something you think I can change?" "I don't know," Zara said with the brutal honesty only children could manage. "Maybe. People can change if they really want to, but it's hard. You've been selfish for so long that it's probably like a habit." "I want to be better for you," Marcus said. "Then practice," Zara replied. "Every day practice being less selfish, even when it's hard." By the time Zara was 15, the relationship between her and Marcus had settled into something stable and real, if not uncomplicated. They had father-daughter dinners. Marcus attended Zara's soccer games and her school concerts. When Zara struggled with the pressure of high school, Marcus was there to listen. When she was accepted to a prestigious science program, Marcus was the first person she called to tell. Their relationship wasn't the one Zara had imagined as a small child. It wasn't instantaneous healing or magical reconciliation. It was something harder and more real than that. It was two people learning how to be family despite years of distance and denial. It was Marcus genuinely changing, day after day, moment after moment, choosing to put his daughter's needs above his own comfort or convenience. Victoria's consulting firm expanded. She took on more cases, helping people navigate situations where they needed to uncover truth, where systems seemed designed to suppress what should be known. She developed a reputation as someone who operated with integrity, someone who could be trusted to do the right thing, even when the right thing was difficult. Alicia continued her work in community mental health, using her own experience to help other single mothers navigate the system, to advocate for their children, to fight for acknowledgement and support. She became known for her compassion and her tenacity. She helped dozens of women establish paternity, secure child support, build the kind of legal frameworks that would protect their children. On Zara's 16th birthday, she asked for something unexpected. She wanted to change her last name legally, not to erase her mother's identity or history, but to acknowledge the father who'd finally learned to show up. She wanted to be Zara Wellington officially and completely. Alicia signed the paperwork without hesitation. Zara deserved to carry her father's name if she wanted to. She'd earned the right to claim that identity through her willingness to hold her father accountable and her patience with his growth. Marcus wept when he heard the news. He called Alicia personally, something he rarely did, usually communicating through the more formal channels of scheduled visits and texts about logistics. "I don't deserve this," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "No, you don't," Alicia agreed, not unkindly. "But Zara is giving it to you anyway. Don't waste it. Don't go back to who you were. Keep being who you're learning to become." 5 years after the courtroom verdict, at Zara's college graduation, the three of them stood together for photographs: Alicia, Marcus, and Victoria. Victoria had become part of the family in her own way, the godmother figure who'd saved them all by refusing to participate in lies. Zara had received a full scholarship to study astrophysics at a prestigious university. She'd spent the past 4 years excelling in her field, making friends who challenged her, exploring the universe through telescopes and mathematics. She was brilliant and kind and grounded, everything her mother had fought to help her become. "You did it," Marcus said to Alicia, as they watched Zara pose in her cap and gown. "You gave her everything I tried to deny her. You gave her truth and advocacy and a mother who would fight for her." "And you learned to show up," Alicia replied. "That matters too. She has a father now because you decided to become one." Marcus nodded, accepting the acknowledgement without trying to take full credit for something that was fundamentally Zara's accomplishment. He'd learned humility along the way. Victoria had become a successful businesswoman, her firm now nationally recognized for its work in uncovering truth and protecting vulnerable populations. She'd been invited to speak at universities about ethics in business. She'd become a consultant for legal cases involving paternity and child welfare. She'd built something meaningful out of her choice to say no to Marcus Wellington's $1 million. But more importantly than professional success, she'd built genuine friendships. She attended Zara's graduations and birthdays. She was present for Alicia's promotion to director of her mental health clinic. She was part of the family that had emerged from the ashes of a millionaire's lies. On the evening of Zara's graduation, the four of them, Alicia, Marcus, Victoria, and Zara, sat at a quiet restaurant, the kind of place where they wouldn't be photographed or interrupted. They ordered wine and expensive food and talked about the future. "I want to study dark matter," Zara announced. "I want to understand the things we can't see, the things that hold the universe together." "That seems fitting," Marcus said, and there was something deeply understanding in his tone. "Given your history." "What do you mean?" Zara asked. "You've spent your whole life dealing with invisible things," he said slowly. "With things that existed but were being denied. Now you're choosing to study the things that are real but can't be directly observed. You're turning your pain into purpose." Victoria squeezed Alicia's hand under the table. Sometimes redemption wasn't just about the person seeking redemption. Sometimes it was about a whole family learning to see clearly, to name things as they were, and to build something real and true in the space where lies used to live. Zara Wellington published her first major research paper at the age of 25. It was titled, "Dark Matter and Invisible Systems: What Astrophysics Can Teach Us About Hidden Truths." The paper discussed not just the physics of dark matter, but also used the metaphor to talk about systems of inequality and denial, about things that were real and consequential even when they were being actively suppressed. She dedicated it to her mother for insisting on truth, and to her father for learning to see. Marcus had retired from his financial career 5 years earlier. He'd used much of his wealth to establish a foundation that helped single mothers access legal services to establish paternity and secure child support. It was his way of taking responsibility, not just for his own actions, but for the systemic failures that allowed men like him to operate with impunity for so long. Catherine, living in Los Angeles, had remarried and was happy. She stayed in touch with Alicia and Zara, the connection between them complicated, but genuine. She'd learned hard lessons about trust and judgment, but she'd also learned that it was possible to move forward, to build a new life, to find genuine happiness on the other side of betrayal. Victoria's consulting firm had expanded to a team of 15 people. She'd hired Alicia as her director of community advocacy, combining her mental health background with her experience navigating systems designed to suppress vulnerable people. Together, they helped countless families establish truth where lies had been permitted to flourish. Detective Raymond Morris retired from the police force, and was honored at a ceremony where Alicia, Marcus, Victoria, and Zara all attended. They all spoke about the importance of his willingness to listen, to dig deeper, to pursue truth when it would have been easier to dismiss a claim as unfounded. "It all comes back to this," Morris said in his retirement speech, looking at the assembled group. "Whether we're willing to believe people when they tell us the truth about their lives, whether we're willing to do the hard work of investigating, of demanding evidence, of holding powerful people accountable, whether we're willing to say no to money and threats and the easy path, because there's a child somewhere who deserves to be acknowledged." Alicia and Marcus remained cordial but never romantic. They co-parented their daughter with increasing skill and genuine respect for one another. What had begun as courtroom adversaries had become something more like partners in the project of raising an extraordinary young woman. Zara, at 30, was leading her own research team at a major university. She was known for her brilliance and her integrity, for her insistence on rigorous methodology and ethical practice. She was also known for her mentorship of young scientists from underprivileged backgrounds, her belief that talent wasn't confined to those who could afford private education. She'd never married, though she'd had serious relationships. She'd chosen to pour her passion into her work, into understanding the nature of reality and the systems that shaped human experience. When asked in an interview why she was so committed to making science accessible, she talked about her own experience, about growing up invisible in the eyes of her father, about her mother's determination to make her visible and real and acknowledged, about the people who'd fought for her truth. "I believe that truth matters," she said in the interview. "I believe that being seen and acknowledged is a basic human need. I believe that systems that allow people to be erased are immoral. And I believe that once you understand that about your own life, you can't help but see it everywhere in the world around you. You can't help but work to change it." The interview went viral in academic circles. People quoted her words about truth and visibility and systems of erasure. She became something of a spokesperson for the importance of acknowledging reality, for the power of saying no to comfortable lies. She never mentioned Marcus by name, but everyone who knew her story knew who she was talking about. A father who'd tried to make his daughter disappear. A father who'd learned, eventually, to see her. A father who'd changed because his daughter was patient enough to give him the chance to change while also insisting on her own truth. 5 years after Zara's graduation, Alicia married someone unexpected. Not Marcus, but a woman named Dr. Sarah Mills, the child psychologist who'd guided them through the early days of Zara's relationship with her father. They'd grown close over the years, had fallen in love in a quiet, gradual way. They opened a joint practice combining therapy with advocacy, helping families navigate trauma and systems of oppression. Zara was happy for her mothers. She'd always understood that her mother deserved love and companionship. Alicia's happiness was deeply connected to Zara's own sense of well-being. A happy mother was a gift you gave yourself. On a spring day, 15 years after the courtroom verdict, all of them gathered again. Alicia and Sarah, Marcus, Victoria, Zara, Detective Morris and his wife, Catherine and her husband, Dr. Mills, now Alicia's wife, and dozens of people whose lives had been changed by the fight for truth. They were celebrating the passage of the Thornton Act, a piece of legislation designed to streamline the paternity establishment process for single mothers, to provide legal resources and support, to make it harder for wealthy men to hide their children behind lawyers and threats. Zara had testified before Congress about her experience. She'd talked about being invisible, about waiting 9 years to be acknowledged, about the systematic failures that had allowed her father to deny her existence for so long. Her testimony had been powerful and unsparing. She'd named the ways that power and money could be weaponized against children. She'd talked about the difference between biological paternity and emotional paternity, about the work of actually being a father. She'd praised her mother's persistence and her father's eventual willingness to change. The legislation had passed with surprising bipartisan support. Zara had watched from the gallery as it was signed into law. She'd cried, not from happiness, but from the recognition of how much suffering could have been prevented if this law had existed when her mother was fighting for acknowledgement. When they all gathered to celebrate, Marcus approached Zara quietly. "I want you to know that I'm grateful," he said, "for giving me the chance to become your father, for holding me accountable while also allowing me to grow, for using your story to help other families, for turning your pain into something that helps others." Zara accepted his gratitude without embarrassment or self-consciousness. "You did the work," she said. "I gave you the chance, but you had to do the actual work of changing. That's what matters." Victoria watched the interaction from across the room. She'd built a life she was proud of. She'd refused $1 million, and in doing so had helped create a world slightly more aligned with truth and justice. She'd built a business and a reputation and friendships that mattered. But more than that, she'd learned something essential about herself. She'd learned that she was willing to pay a price for integrity, that she could say no to power and money and threats, that the choices you make about who you are and what you're willing to do echo through other people's lives in ways you can't predict or control. "Thank you for not taking the money," Alicia said, finding Victoria at the celebration. "For choosing to say no." "Thank you for choosing to fight," Victoria replied. "It gave me a reason to say no. It gave my refusal weight and meaning." Alicia smiled. 15 years of friendship had not diminished the gratitude she felt for this woman who'd chosen to do the right thing when it would have been so much easier to do otherwise. As the sun set over the city, all of them stood together. This unlikely family formed from a millionaire's lie and a woman's refusal to let her daughter be erased. They stood together having fought through the courts and the media and their own doubts and fears. They stood together having built something real and true and lasting. Zara looked up at the sky that held so many mysteries, so many things that were real even though they couldn't be seen. She thought about dark matter and invisible systems. She thought about the way truth persisted even when people tried to deny it. She thought about her mother's courage and her father's growth, and Victoria's integrity. She thought about all the children still waiting to be seen, still struggling for acknowledgement, still hoping that someone would fight for their right to exist. And she knew that this was why she devoted her life to science. Because science was about looking closely at reality, about insisting on evidence and refusing to accept comfortable lies, about having the courage to say, "I don't know," and then doing the work to find out. The work of truth, the work of seeing, the work of making sure that no child ever had to wait 9 years to be acknowledged by their father. That was the real legacy of what had happened to her. Not bitterness or anger or broken relationships, but a commitment to making the world a place where truth was honored and children were seen and nobody could hide behind money and power and lawyers.